Hey there. This is my video for Element 13, which is analyzing student growth and talking about where the students, why they did or did not demonstrate or adequate growth. I guess why they did not demonstrate adequate growth. And so I have 3 learning targets pulled up. One of them, RPO3, was my level 6 learning target where the students did achieve adequate growth. All of them, they grew. And so I don't really need to pull that one up. The 2 that I have up here are R102, which is the one that's in front of us here. And these students, I described adequate growth in my mind was students who attained proficiency. If everybody started off at a 1.5 or higher, with the exception of one person who started off at a 0, and she actually made it to a 3. If everybody started off at a 1.5, then I did expect them to reach proficiency, attain proficiency. And if they didn't, then I would describe that as not demonstrating adequate growth within the time frame that we had. So looking at these students, I could go down one by one. Student number 5 here did not reach proficiency because his answer on the summarizing portion was too brief. And this is one of my students where all the students ended up taking a reflection at the end of this, a post-assessment reflection where they talked about the scores, what they thought they deserved, and why. My student here, number 5, felt like he had gotten so much better at finding themes and summarizing, and now he can do it really fast. And so I said this is kind of his MO, that the student does like to work fast and does like to be very brief about things. And I think ultimately this student is proficient, but didn't totally demonstrate that on the post-assessment because the student was trying to get through it too fast. So going forward, I don't feel like I need to have any further instruction with this student. I feel like they are good to go. I feel like the instruction that they need is more the reminders of to slow yourself down, to talk about it, get your details out, make sure you're explaining yourself well, make sure you're representing yourself well on all assessments. And not buzzing through it. Student 10 was one that I had, I believe 10 and a couple more, maybe 16, and there was a handful more. You'll see that on the intervention one on element 14. These students, I feel like, had some vocabulary issues. We're a little bit confused on the difference between a theme topic or a topic and where I wanted them to give me theme topics, some of them gave me theme statements. And so I feel like they didn't quite understand what a topic was. And I also feel like this student number 10 is one that has some misunderstandings, and I'm realizing that I need to spend a little more time going over directions with number 10 here. Number 10 also has a misunderstanding about what a summary is, and wasn't able to give me a good summary. So this one, student number 10, definitely needs some reteaching as far as these things go. Although when you talk to her and some of her answers on the assessments do show that she does have some understanding. So I think a 2.5 is a good score for her right now, where her current knowledge is, and hopefully doing some vocabulary instruction will improve that. Student number 13 was absent for 2 weeks, and so I pretty much think that it's like he took the pre-assessment and left, and then came back and pretty much took the post-assessment. And so not bad that he went from 1.5 to a 2.5, I guess, although we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Student number 14, I feel like they're confused about the difference between the theme and topic. So same once again, where the theme and they kind of mixed them up. My student 15 is received my lowest score and ultimately showed the lowest growth. Didn't do anything. He's a very intelligent boy, but he kind of has trouble engaging in content that's just not interesting to him. He's one of my students that I do a fantasy football league with, and when we sit down and do fantasy football league, that kid is on it, and he is crunching numbers like the best of them. But when it's anything else, and honestly, the kid has sports on the brain 24/7. So, while I try to tailor content to the kid's interests, you can't always hit every one of them. And in this one, I wasn't able to get anything in here for him. And so, my guess is that if everything that we did was about sports or sports related, that he would have gotten that better. So, I feel like. Unfortunately, I don't know if he is at a 1.5, maybe a 2 over his overall score at R102 and finding theme statements. But I'd love to be able to go back and try to see if I can do some instruction with him. I think ultimately, though, it's going to have to be he gets some special services. It might have to be with the SPED team to see if they can help him kind of get some of these needs met. Student 16, confused about the difference between a theme topic and theme statement. Student 17, Student 17, I believe, is one of the ones that I have here. I have a couple of them, 17 and 31 here. And I copied and posted the same thing. 17 and 31 are the same. They have they're ELA students, or we call them culturally CLD students, culturally linguistically diverse students, who I think just have a little bit of problems kind of explaining their thinking when it comes to writing down some of these written responses. And so I feel like when you talk to them, they know it. And when I've had conferences with them, or when I discuss this, they show evidence that they do. But when it came time to work on this assessment, something about the wording of the question, I'm not sure what it was, but they weren't able to articulate themselves enough to meet the criteria to get a score 3. And so one of the things, I'll just go off on a tangent right now, I guess, about this is as I look at this, and as I've gone through this whole course 2 for HRT, it's reminded me of something that I kind of already know, and it's that, assessments. And this is something that you've talked about, Bob, when you've come to visit us. But the assessments really just the reliability of an assessment is just so low that, I mean, this is great. It's giving me just a small piece of the puzzle, and it's a piece of the puzzle that I have to look at in a multitude of angles to say, well, okay, so did this kid understand it? But it was the way the question was written. Did the kid understand it but missed it because they were having a bad day or something's going on in their personal lives? Does the kid understand theme, but the story that I had them read theme on had some elements in it that are outside of their understanding, vocabulary, that have something that they've never been exposed to before. There's just so many different elements that come into play when it comes to all of this assessment. That the reliability, and I'm not the world's greatest test writer either. When it comes down to it, I think the reliability on these assessments, and I'm not going to say on every assessment that I do, but most of the assessments that I do is pretty darn low. And so, when it comes down to having this be an end-all be-all, it's not. This is far from being the determining factor, right? And I ultimately now, Dr. Marzano, I have a hard time really utilizing almost any summative assessment to say, I have a hard time using any summative assessment to say that this proves that the student is 100% entirely proficient. And that's probably an obvious thing, but to me, it's just, when I'm going through all this, I really want to just sit down and talk to the kids, and I really just want to have them show me. And I know that with having 32 kids in the morning and 30 kids in the afternoon, that gets pretty difficult to do. But I know it's the right thing to do, is to be able to tailor assessments to students' needs and interests, and to make this a much more of a flexible process rather than have it be so rigid, which I think a lot of educators do, and I think a lot of administrators ask us to do. And not that anybody here is asking me to do that, and I know. It's just, reflecting on all of this. Reflecting on all of this gets me to, this is all great information, and I think like this right here, the student growth chart has allowed me to see and remind myself that, hey, I do have some students who have vocabulary needs beyond maybe the rest of the class that I need to address, especially when going in to assess their knowledge. That there's some students who have interest needs that need to be met, and there's some students who need to be able to, while I need to teach them to give a good written response, I also, if I am assessing knowledge on R102, I'm not assessing their writing, I'm assessing their knowledge on R102, and so I need them to be able to articulate it verbally, or however they need to articulate it in order to prove to me that they're proficient. So, anyways, back to this, you can see, the most that's really where everybody falls into. I did have a group of students I feel like who were missing a little bit on the summarizing, and I feel like that's one that's slightly on me. I think I did focus a little bit more on the finding topics for themes and finding themes within the stories than I did on the assessment piece of this. I didn't spend as much time on that, and so that could be why I had, I want to say 2 or 3 students who had an issue with summarizing. Maybe they were accurate with the theme and accurate with the theme statements, but when it came time to summarize, they missed the mark a little bit. They focused on things that weren't necessarily the most important. So, anyways, that's all my thoughts on this, on these students. And so this is now, right now we're on December 11th, and this took place I want to say a couple weeks ago. And so I have my intervention is in place, and we've been talking with the students about that. And so that's where we're going with this process. So that's all I got for today. Thanks.